We're going to be drawing 2-point perspective, and this is an example of what one looks like when it's somewhat finished. This is just the drawing, the basic outline, and this is an example of a finished piece. So we're going to eventually be making these into cities in the future. So you can see some of the things that students have added, some of the different elements that students have added to their work to make it look like it's in the future. So we're using what's called 2-point perspective. So we have 2 points here, and we're going to be using these points to determine how to draw the angles of the different buildings. We need a T-square and a ruler and a pencil to start. The first line that I want to draw is going to be a horizontal line. It's going to be the horizon line, and we're going to use that horizon line to help us to place all of the other lines and buildings. So in order to draw a horizon line, I'm going to use this T-square, because if I were to just draw a horizontal line across, I could get the angles off and then things would look wonky and like a fun house, and that's not the look we're going for this. So I'm going to use the T-square, and you can see the T-square, there's a ledge here that I want to line up with the edge of my paper. So it doesn't have to be perfectly halfway. We're not measuring or anything, but I want to go approximately halfway down my paper and very lightly draw my line. On both ends of my paper, I want to add vanishing points on the horizon line. So vanishing points could be anywhere on this line. They could even be off the paper and over here. But to keep things simple, this is our first drawing. We're just going to put them on the edge of the paper on the horizon line together. So the next line I need to draw is, if I look over here, the corner of our building. Okay, so notice this line right here doesn't go all the way to the top or all the way to the bottom. It's just, it's intersecting the horizon line, but it's going about that tall. And if you draw a taller one, it's going to be a taller building, and a shorter one, it's going to be a shorter building. So they can be, you can kind of use your own creativity to draw this. And again, I'm going to go about halfway along the paper, but it doesn't need to be in any one spot. It can be over here. Your corner of your building could be here, and then one side could be going this way, and then you'd have a larger side going that way. It just is your choice, but we're going to keep it simple. So again, I'm using the T-square. I'm making sure the edge of my paper lines up with the T-square, and I'm just going to draw the corner of my building, just like that. Now what I want to do is grab my other ruler, and I'm just going to make a little dot here so you can see, but I'm just going to line up my ruler with this dot at the bottom of the corner of the building and the vanishing point on this side, and draw a line all the way there, just like that. And I want to do that on the other side as well. So if I'm going too fast for you, feel free to pause at any time to catch up. This is going to be the bottom line of all the buildings, and I want to put in a sidewalk. So when I do that, I'm just going to bring this line down a ways and just make a dot. So I'm not drawing the whole line, I'm just putting a dot so that way I can kind of see where it goes. So I'm using this line as a guide, and I'm just going to go slightly below the corner and put a dot right there. And then I want to do the same thing that I did with these two lines here. So I'm going to make sure that my ruler touches the dot and the opposite vanishing point and draw a line, and do that on the other side as well. So now I have my sidewalk. So these lines are actually going to be angling towards the opposite vanishing point. Okay, so when I draw this, the first square is pretty easy to do. All you do is you just extend these two lines here. So I'm just going to go like that. And that. So that's my first square. Kind of messed that up a little. And then I'm going to start drawing on either side. So let's just focus on this side first. So I'm going to make sure, I'm going to use my ruler when I draw these, and I'm going to make sure that my ruler on this end is always touching the vanishing point. And then I just kind of rotate it like this when I'm drawing my lines. So they're going to be larger at first. And get closer together as we go further back. Now I want to do the same thing on this side, except I'm going to use the opposite vanishing point, which makes sense. You couldn't draw lines to this vanishing point because they'd be going the wrong way. And we have a sidewalk. So the next thing I want to do is draw in that corner building. So the very first thing we'll do to draw that is we're going to be drawing the top two angles, and then we'll be drawing them straight down to the sidewalk. The ruler is touching the dot at the top of the building and the vanishing point. And I just want to draw a section, just like that. I'm not drawing it all the way there because then we just have one building and that wouldn't be very interesting. And then I'm going to do the opposite side, and you can make one side a little bit longer than the other. It's up to you. Now I have the top parts of the building. I just need to draw the line straight down. This is where a lot of students decide to make shortcuts and just use their ruler and eyeball it and draw straight down. The problem is, if you're using a regular ruler, I can get it at any angle and it's not going to be perfectly vertical, and eventually what happens is these lines start to look really wonky and they're not accurate and looks more like a fun house. So I want to use my T-square to draw that vertical line down to the sidewalk. And I want to use my T-square correctly as well. So sometimes I see students work and their lines aren't right, but they used a T-square, but they just didn't use it correctly. So make sure you're always lining up that edge of the paper with your T-square. And another thing too that I see sometimes when they're using these is the T-square doesn't touch, this straight edge doesn't touch the paper, and so sometimes students kind of wiggle the pencil as they're drawing the line. You want to try to keep it pointed straight up at the ceiling when you draw that line, so that way you don't get a wonky line there too. So there's my first building, and you won't be able to see the horizon line anymore because the building is overlapping the horizon line. So I'm going to erase that. There's two types of buildings that we can put next to this. One is taller and one is shorter, and they're both a little bit different. So I'm going to start with the taller building. So we're going to start with our second building here, and it's going to be taller, so I'm going to extend this line up a ways. And I'm just going to make sure my ruler is lined up with that corner of the building and extend it up like that. And you can decide how tall you want it to be. And let's just put a little dot there just to use as a reference. And then I'm going to draw the top of the building, but I need to line it up with this vanishing point. So hopefully this is starting to get to be a little bit more comfortable for you. Always going to be drawing horizontal lines to the vanishing points. Most of the vertical lines are going to be straight up and down with your T-square. So I want to draw that line straight down using my T-square. Now this building, you'll actually see the corner or the side of the building because it's taller than the front building. So we're going to need to draw in the side of the building, and you could probably guess that side is actually going to go to the opposite vanishing point. So just going to line these up and draw it. And sometimes you can draw it straight down and it'll just intersect the building in front of it. For example, if you look at this one, I drew this side straight down and it worked out okay. In this situation, it looks a little funny. So I'm going to erase part of it and just draw the back of the building straight down using my T-square again. So there we have a taller building. That one's actually more complicated than a shorter one. So we'll draw the shorter one next, and let's put it on this side. So you can determine how tall you want it to be. Just make sure it's above the horizon line. So let's say this building here is going to be this tall. I'm just going to line up my points and draw as wide as I want it to be, and then I'm going to use my T-square and draw it straight down, just like that. And of course, both of these buildings are overlapping the horizon line, so I want to erase that. Okay. So we have 3 buildings here. The buildings are going to get smaller the closer you get to the vanishing point, just like our squares of our sidewalk get smaller. And they'll also get shorter. So sometimes I see students draw a building that's this close to the vanishing point and they try to draw it way up here and it looks super funky because the angles are way off. So make sure you can put a few taller buildings, especially when you're this close. I could put maybe another tall building here. But you don't want to put super tall buildings when you get to the vanishing point, just because they... Another thing I want to talk about is anytime that you are drawing signs or door frames or windows, the horizontal lines, so for example, this line here and this line here, always go to a vanishing point. And the vertical lines, so these sides of the window or the sign here, are going to be drawn in with a T-square. And then a door would be even easier because you just have to draw the top of it. All right, so I'm just going to draw in a few more buildings here, and I want you to do a few more on your practice drawing also before you start your final. Moment to show you a few ideas. So this is called a 2-point perspective because we have 2 points. You can also do, this would be 1-point perspective. You can see there's just one vanishing point here. Or you can even do 3-point perspective. This was done by a student, an 8th grade student, and she had these 2 points up here and her 3rd point was up here. So there's a lot you can do with this. We're just doing some basic linear perspective drawing, but there's more that you can do if you want to.